Guys, so today we're going to be starting something new on my channel. Today we're going to be reading creepypastas. Now I don't know if this is going to work out with y'all, but if y'all like it, like and subscribe and tell me. So the creepypasta we're going to be reading today is Abandoned by Disney. So let's get right into it. Some of you may have heard that Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town. Disney built Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters too shallow for their ships to safely operate. And there was even blame on the cast, on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work on a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of the story ends. It wasn't because of sand. It obviously was because the foreigners were lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt the reasons are legitimate. Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began the construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, you might better remember the story The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you'd know that it's a cartoon from Disney's. You'd know it as a cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals, simultaneously threatened or pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project. And there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes. Then they turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home had just been constructed and was immediately condemned with no little explanation. The land was grabbed by the government and supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well that what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney's company actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by the jungle, staffed with men and women in long clothes and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace jungle, long clothes, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also somewhat exotic area of the southern USA. It was an unquestionable mix at that point of history. One member in the crowd tried to storm the stage, but was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentations board over his knee. Disney took the community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed and the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could say or do about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings at the local venues came into play as their options turned onto a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort, and the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and unusual annoyances associated with the influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. Honestly, I honestly didn't give the place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it close over a decade ago. I lived maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard rumblings and didn't experience it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals all around probably had a hand wrecking that place. People were just as angry about Treasure Island as people were here angry about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. They wouldn't have taken a few swings at some merchandise after that. Well, what I'm getting is that the blog about Treasure Island has got me thinking. Even though many years have passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration in Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take into a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time getting in there because honestly it took me another year after I found that treasure article was going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource had any mention of the place. It had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, that nobody before myself apparently thought about the place, or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place. Though that it was expected since they had all swung at Disney's way, they wouldn't be lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations actually asked Google, for example, to remove the links from search results. Basically, for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather words were made unaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent to the people who had recently went to Disney World, and I guess since I've been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang into it. I just got shoved into my books and my comics from my childhood. I remembered it months into my research, and I found out that it even took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin and my parents had that they all shoved it into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, and most transplants had been moved to the beach in recent years. Or old residents who just sneered at me, made rude gestures, and the second I mentioned to say, where would I find Mowgli's? The drive took me an ordinarily long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that ran rampant over the overpopulated area mixed with native species of flora that actually belonged there, and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe, and I reached to the front gates of the resort. Tremendous monolithic wooden gates whose supports were on either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap, and a hand-painted letter scrawled in black, abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of the past local employee wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not to drive, so grabbing my digital camera and a map whose flip side showed the layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entryway. A palm tree stood untended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos. As carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms, all that remained was an outdoor structure. Structures were broken, rotting wood, and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar showed by a simply pile of assorted debris chopped up in past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting on the grounds were the statue of Baloo, the friendly bear of the Jungle Book, which stood in some courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jaw toward no one, staring into an empty space with a silly toothy grin as bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur and vines ensured of his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find outside the building covered in graffiti and the original paint had peeled and chipped away. The front floors weren't open, they had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors the gaping maw someone had once again painted abandoned by Disney. I wish I could tell you all the awesome stuff I saw inside of that palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no. Inside of the building was so stark, so bare. I actually think people have stolen molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, fake trees, that were all resting in its empty echo chamber and amplified by every step of a slow rat-tat machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you imagine, in an industrial food prep area with the alliances in space. No expenses spared, every glass surface was broken, every floor was knocked off its hinges, every metal surface was kicked and dented, the entire place smelled like very old piss. A huge freezer that was remotely cool now had a row upon a shelf of empty space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably from hanging cuts of meat, and it stood aside the mall menu. I noticed everything was swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but all their movements were so slow and so small that it had been almost impossible to see. I figured that had been caused by footsteps. I stopped from swinging and then clutching it in my fists, then carefully letting go within seconds as hard to swing more. The public bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place, just like the Treasure Island Resort. Someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other impalements. There was about a half an inch of rancid, sinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What was odd is that the toilets and sinks and bibbets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped and leaked and fell freely. Seemed to me that they should have shut water off a long time ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort. Naturally, I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. It was like a whisper, probably my own breathing and echoing in the silence, or just another case of sound-flowing water playing tricks on my mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it, short, unknown reply. I didn't know what, I didn't know that. Your father told you, unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I've experienced. Why I thought there might be something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had hold up there, and they would probably knife me. at the front doors of the palace again. I figured I hadn't found anything and note I wasted the trip up. As I looked at the floor, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I apparently missed. Something that would have given me at least one thing to show for trouble, even if it was just a photograph. It was like a life-like statue of a python, maybe 50 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself in a pedestal right on the center of the arena. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the earth in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo, and then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the detail of his face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted his head and looked directly in my eyes, turned and slithered into the pedestal, across the grass into the trees, all 50 feet of it. Its long head disappeared into the woods before its tail had even left the stunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds, right there on the floor plan map as the reptile house. I should have known. I read about the sharks in Treasure Isle, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded and utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from there where the snake had been, back toward the palace. Even though it was totally gone, it wasn't taking any chances, and it backed my way into the building. And I took a few deep breaths and slapped my own face to get myself in the right head again after that. I felt the place. I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline myself in broken glass and dead leaf carpet and hold myself onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had some stairs near the palace's lobby, and I had to go there to have a seat until I felt better. The staircase was far enough from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a starting accumulation of dust. I pulled the wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted in with "Abandoned by Disney," motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and I sat on it to keep it at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward below ground level. Using my camera flash and a sort of improvised light, I could see what the staircase ended in. Metal mesh door with the padlock. A sign on the door. A real sign read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up spirits for a little bit, for one reason. One, a mascots only area would definitely have some interesting stuff back there. In the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down here. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. And this was one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or one totally steal. I had come to the palace agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually, that's wrong. It did take much to bust the metal plate off the wall the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay took most of the work for me. I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of, or wouldn't be able to do at the time. The mascots only area was startling and welcome change for the rest of the building I've ever seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light was overhead was illuminated, and even though I flickered and faded randomly, also nothing had been stolen or broken, even if the age exposure was still definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens, and there were clocks. Even a punching clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time charts. Chairs were scattered around. Was a small break-in with an old static-filled television and a long rotted-out fruit and drink in the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything was left in a state of evacuation. As I walked in the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascot-only area, the sights became just more and more interesting. As I went further, desk tables were knocked over, papers were scattered and almost melted with the damp floor. A large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush, and I applied the least amount of force. Clothing items hanging on the hooks in the room simply fell to moist threads as I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me that the light was coming more and more sparse and unreliable as I went farther into the dark, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured it was probably where the costumes were kept. I definitely wanted a photograph of what twisted, sinking mess. Try as I might, not an angle or trick, I tried, the door wouldn't budge. This is until I gave up and started to walk away. Then there was a slight popping sound and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room it was completely dark, pitch black. I used my camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed by, flickering and fading and out like the rest I passed it. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was just going to keep brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But then, just when I thought it would reach the critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly how I'd pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like string cartoon characters from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers toward the back. What I found odd as I wanted to photograph right away was a Mickey Mouse costume in the center of the room. Unlike their other costume, it was lying on its back in the center of the room like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotting and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even more odd, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of actual Mickey Mouse. Black where it should be white and white where it should be black. As normally, red pants were light blue. This side of the off-putting enough, I actually postponed the photographing thing until last. I took the pictures of the costume hanging on the walls, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces. Some where the plastic eyes were missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the beverage characters' heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of Donald Duck in costume and carefully moved the head so the thing wouldn't fall apart. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud, chattering sound made me jump with affright. I looked down at my feet, and between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the Donald Duck head immediately, as you would expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back at the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it. I had to. For numbers of reasons you may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I'd need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start that even if this was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. This is why the resort had been closed. It was only one outside Disney co who knew me. Then that's when the photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the room started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing onto its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there in the center of the room. Its fake face just started directly at me as I mumbled, "No, no, 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 no," over and over. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim at the opposite creature who was quietly sizing me up, head tilted. The digital The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey Mouse costume as the camera moved in my unsteady hands. The dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died, went blank and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working on its clumsy glove-clawed fingers around its neck, clawing impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free from a predator's jaws. As it worked the digits into his neck, so much blood, so much thick, curdled yellow blood. I turned away and heard the sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away above the doorway in the room. I saw the final meshes clawed into the metal with bone and fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote a blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, I fled for my sanity and my very life. I knew that Disney did not anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. The end. All right, guys,